7 signs God is dealing with those who hurt you. Have you ever wondered if God is actually doing something about the people who broke you? You smiled through the pain. They moved on like nothing happened. But what if I told you, this silence isn't the end of the story? Welcome to Sound Codes, where faith meets the wounds we don't speak of, and healing begins with truth. In today's video, we're diving deep into a question too many are afraid to ask. Does God really deal with those who hurt me, or do they just get away with it? Through the story of Sarah, a single mom from Portland, and through timeless wisdom from Scripture, we'll uncover 7 quiet, undeniable signs that God is moving. Not always loud, not always fast, but always just. You'll find hope. You'll find clarity. You'll see yourself. And friend, there's something powerful waiting for you at the end of this video. Don't miss a second. So take a breath. Let go of the noise. And let's begin where most people stop paying attention, in the silence. Sign number 1, when their peace begins to crack. Sarah saw the photo late at night, while folding laundry in her small bedroom, lit only by a soft, yellow lamp. Her ex was smiling, wide, carefree, almost smug, standing on the rooftop of a building in California. A crisp shirt, a fresh haircut, a glass of red wine in hand. In that photo, he looked like he had completely escaped the past. And Sarah, like she never existed at all. She didn't like it. Didn't message. She just folded the last shirt in silence and turned off the light. But what she would never know was that just hours later, he woke up in the dark. The room was still. No sound. But the dream lingered, a tiny voice, fragile and trembling inside his mind. "Daddy, where are you?" It came twice that week. And both times, he didn't dare fall back asleep. Peace doesn't disappear like a storm. It leaves like the tide, slowly, quietly, and without warning. When someone wounds a soul that loved them with nothing but purity and faith, the first thing they lose isn't the relationship. It's their inner peace. They don't know why they're restless. They blame work, stress, traffic. But really, it's their conscience, speaking not in words, but in feeling. The insomnia, the shallow breath, that hollow ache they can't explain. Sarah didn't send any messages. She didn't post cryptic status updates. She just stayed silent. And in that silence, God began to move. Because he doesn't need thunder to stir someone's heart. He just needs a quiet space, long enough for truth to rise from deep within the soul. No one sleeps soundly when the heart already knows it's wrong. Sign number 2, when doors start closing, quietly but relentlessly. Her ex walked away feeling lighter. A new apartment. A cleaner schedule. No more crying kids in the hallway. No more quiet tension from a woman unraveling in silence. 3 months later, he got promoted. From the outside, it looked like things were falling into place. Like he had made the right decision. But then, just a few weeks after that, a short meeting with HR. Team dynamic issues, they said. The woman in charge that day just happened to be someone who once held Sarah's hand in prayer at church. No one saw the thread connecting it all. But in the spiritual realm, something had already fractured. Because when someone who once hurt you walks away from a person carrying divine favor, they don't just leave the relationship. They step out from under a covering they never knew was protecting them. And when that covering lifts, doors don't slam. They close slowly, silently. But they stay closed. The blessings don't pour in like they used to. Connections stop reaching back. The world that once felt open begins to shrink. And the most haunting part? They don't realize it. Not right away. Because divine doors don't announce when they're locking. They just stop opening. But once peace fades, and every door begins to quietly seal shut, what happens when life itself starts turning cold and unfamiliar? Sign 3, when struggles start surrounding them. It didn't start with an explosion. Just quiet cracks, a sleepless night, a strange tension in meetings, a friend who no longer looked him in the eye. For Sarah's ex, it was just life being life. But truth was, life was withdrawing from him, piece by piece. His new relationship turned cold, not from arguments, but from the emptiness he carried. He wasn't the same man. The sparkle in his eyes faded. His voice sounded thinner. His presence forgettable. Meanwhile, Sarah was rising. She woke up with the sun, packed lunchboxes with humming lips, laughed when her daughter told her stories. She wasn't wondering about him anymore, because she had moved beyond that version of her story. One night, he sent a message, "I still think about you." She never replied. Not out of bitterness, but because the space she stood in now was sacred. And not everyone gets to return to sacred ground once they've walked away. Those who once hurt you aren't always punished in public, but they begin living under a quiet pressure no one can see. Because grace, once taken for granted, never returns untouched. The struggles don't come like a storm. They gather like fog, quiet, thick, and disorienting. Because when you wound something holy, it doesn't strike back. It simply withdraws its light and lets the absence speak louder than vengeance ever could. So what happens if the next thing they lose is the very thing they always thought would stay? Sign 4, when they lose what they took for granted. He once said to Sarah, "You're the only one in the world who truly gets me." But it wasn't gratitude. It was assumption. As if Sarah and her love were constants. Unshakable. Permanent. Guaranteed. And for a long time, they were. She prayed for him when he stopped praying. Checked in during his darkest weeks. Held him up with her words when his own strength failed. Until one day, she didn't. No more birthday texts. No more prayers whispered into the night. No more gentle encouragements wrapped in light. Not because she was angry, but because she was empty. And finally, she chose herself. He felt the shift. Not through a goodbye message, but through silence that settled like a new kind of presence. That silence used to mean love. Now it meant, this is where I end, and you no longer get to follow. Those who hurt you don't always lose you when you walk away. They lose you the moment you stop waiting. And when something sacred leaves, not in anger, but in stillness, what it leaves behind is louder than any scream. So what happens when they see you rise, not for them, but beyond them? Sign 5, when they see you rise. He wasn't expecting it. A random night. A casual scroll through TikTok. And then there she was. Sarah. On stage. Strong. Still. Radiant in a way that needed no approval anymore. She was sharing her story. Not in whispers, but with clarity in front of hundreds. She'd co-founded a startup for women rising from heartbreak, not out of revenge, but out of revelation. He froze, because he realized the very pain that was supposed to break her became her launch pad. Those who once hurt you may one day witness your rise, but no longer have access to it. Not because you blocked them, but because elevation placed you in a realm where unhealed hearts can't follow. And what stings isn't your success. It's the realization that they had a seat in your story, and they abandoned it. But after the rise, what happens when their conscience finally speaks louder than their pride? Sign 6, when their conscience becomes their cage. No one exposed him. No one dragged him. There were no headlines, no whispers, no backlash. But silence doesn't need an audience. It only needs a soul that knows what it did. Sarah's ex didn't crumble from scandal. He was caged by quiet, by dreams that repeated, by mornings that felt heavy, though nothing had happened. He started remembering, not the romantic moments, but the way Sarah looked at him back when she still believed. It wasn't anger in her eyes. It was sorrow. And somehow, that hurt more. Those who once hurt you may not face public judgment. But memory? It's persistent. Every word you ever spoke, every tear you never let fall in front of them, becomes the echo they can't unhear. You don't have to text. You don't have to remind them. If their soul is still alive, it will do the work for you. And perhaps the most haunting truth is this. It's not losing you that breaks them. It's realizing they let go of the only light that ever touched their life. So what happens next, when you've healed, and God doesn't just restore you, but lifts you somewhere they can never reach again? Sign 7, when God elevates you beyond their reach. Sarah once believed healing meant no longer crying at night. That if she could work, cook, smile with her kids, she must be okay. But God never wanted her to just be okay. He wanted her to soar. One day, she was invited to a podcast, then a TEDx talk. The story she once hid became her greatest gift. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was a vessel. A living witness that you can lose everything and still rise. Not because you're strong, but because God never left you. Those who once hurt you may one day see you elevated. Not for admiration, but for revelation. That grace, once dismissed, doesn't return the same way it left. God didn't lift her to get even. He lifted her to show the world that what tried to break her was only the beginning of her becoming. No one, absolutely no one, can stop what God breathes into motion. So now the question is, what will you do with the light God gave you? Before you go, let God say one last thing to you. Thank you for staying until the very end of this video. This wasn't just about justice, it was about hope. Even if you've been abandoned or broken, God is still moving, not to punish, but to heal you, to lift you, and to guide you back into the light that has always been yours. And because you stayed, here's something I want you to hold on to. Real love will never ask you to question your worth. Someone may have walked away, but God never will. Sometimes, the very pain that broke you becomes the exact path that leads you to freedom. If this message touched you, leave a comment, God saw it. And if there was a moment that made your heart pause, share it. Your words might be the light someone else is praying for. You are not alone. You are seen. You are loved. And ahead of you is something far greater. If this video felt like a whisper from God, please subscribe and share it with someone who needs to feel seen today. And now, before you go, I want to speak this prayer over you. Loving God, would you come close to the one listening right now? Would you place your hand gently on the places still aching inside them? Bring peace that surpasses all understanding. Open a new chapter for them, one filled with the joy, the value, and the light you've placed within them from the very beginning. Remind them they are not forgotten, not forsaken, They are simply being prepared for something better. Amen.